Right. Bingo. Hello, everybody. And about to release the light bulb. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, opening logo. There's our Troubles in Paradise website. Telephones and gears and typewriters, ancient things that no one uses anymore. Analog clocks. What the hell is that? Anyway, welcome to my Evolution Hour. There's Troubles in Paradise, the website. And as I obligatory say, and doesn't do a damn bit of good, check this bloody thing out. This is stuff that you can share. I got a lot of material there, and we've got a lot of things still yet to do, and I'm just barely scratching the surface. So we'll stop sharing that stupid thing, and I can shut that little puppy down, and then we can get on to the matters at hand. Jackson is here today. Will be nice feedback. Wave, Jackson, hi. And as usual, the main subject matter that's the key in the continuing series is the Contested Bones Anti-Evolution book by Christopher Rupe and John Sanford that was sent to me to review because the person who saw it thought, oh, hell, I don't want to read this damn thing, but would you be willing to do it if I sent it to you for nothing? And I go, hey, yeah, sure, because I don't have money to buy things. So I've been doing that as a series, and it's a useful enterprise exploring the source methods of a recent book and finding out what they bring out and what they don't. The upshot is that a big chunk of it is secondary citation. About 40-some-odd% of it is from general articles and the like, a lot of it very dated. Of the technical literature that they do bring up, which is about 40%, about 40% of that gets a blue tag as being misrepresenting, either because it's stepping around information that's directly in it that they aren't discussing, or that they are overlooking all of the little actual follow-up content. So they're drawing on a piece of information that is unfairly using that material, or in some cases, blatantly stepping past little blips and those little ... dots. And so I do find a lot of the old material that they deal with, and some of the other issues that I brought up, which I'll be getting to in a little bit of a moment. Jackson here will talk very briefly about the wonderful world of A Bit of Orange, because A Bit of Orange had been on his show a ways ago, and Jackson can explain a bit about who he is and what experience he had on his show with him.
Yes, indeed. I think I can manage that. Yeah, originally, I was supposed to talk to A Bit of Orange in early June. That was scheduled to be on Godless Cranium's podcast. But Orange got sick, and so that got nixed. And so I ended up talking to Matt Powell, and that's how I got into all of that. So finally, managed to get in touch with Orange. We set up a date around school and work and stuff, and so I got him on, and that was something. He was a nice guy. Yeah,
very amiable, but he did have what I thought of as an extremely annoying property, which is he's a hyper-presuppositionalist. And what he wants to look at is only the things that he wants to look at, only the issues that he wants to deal with. And in his case, he was just obsessed about the evolution definition. How do you define evolution? And you were going on about the standard ones, the change in allele frequencies, and my version is natural branching common descent.
Irrelevant.
It's yes. And the thing is that in all definitions on all subjects whatsoever, definitions are useful as summaries of what you think is going on, but they're not a presupposition. They're just a description of your behavior. The purpose of a definition, the meaning of the definition, comes in how you use it. Like I would say that you could have a systematics, if you want to define systematics as cows and not cows, that is universal. I guarantee you, I can classify every living thing on earth as either a cow or not a cow, but it ain't going to be very useful. So it's how you apply it that matters. And the problem is that you could never get him to the applying part. And so I wanted to explore map of time with him, which is how many data blips does he have in his head, and what does he connect it to?
Very, very, very few. Because for him, in his little orthogenetic tree, you got the soup, rained on the rocks, created soup, then bacteria, then worms, fish, etc. In his little tree, as he even said in the show, you can go watch it, he says in the show, He's not concerned with the data points getting from bacteria to worm. This is just an analogy for what happened. No, it's not.
An analogy is meaningless if it's not analogizing to something. That it's something, it acts as a surrogate or a roadmap. It's like you were arguing about the nature of subway maps without ever paying attention to where the trains go and if you can get off or not. That's the purpose of using the map or the guide. And when you'll notice that when I try to drag him into his little line from fish to lizard actually has a mammoth amount of fossils available currently.
Right.
And I wanted to know whether he knew anything about it. And I deliberately used a term that a creationist who was up on his game should know about. I asked him whether he could evaluate all of those links in those in that line and not connect them all up as monobaramins. And he had no idea what a monobaramin was, which meant that's why I was learning stuff about his brain by methods questions, because I now knew he doesn't read baraminology literature. Otherwise, he would know what that term was. So he doesn't know his side's argument enough to know. And we know he mentioned two creationists, Carl Kirby, who's a nitwit, and Charles Jackson, who's a nitwit. So we've already got him bottom feeding the bottom feeders. This is not a good sign. So I wanted to bring him into the discussion. I see Animal Man pointing out in the live cheat about just finished Aaron Ra's newest systematic classification of life video. Those are
Boreoeutheria.
Mammoth amounts of stuff. I haven't even walked through most of them. I kind of wait for Jackson to kind of bump into some of the systematic fields in his videos because I vet his texts and stuff, and that way I bring up to speed on it.
This one he most recently did was I haven't really done anything about it because when I did my Common Ancestry series where I traced life backwards, I kind of jumped from primates to the start of the true mammal radiation, which kind of skipped a few little, bumps.
Well, and there are all sorts of fascinating little blips because so many mammals are only known by their teeth. And so trying to work out stuff about what's going on with postcranial anatomy when all you've got is a tooth, something like that was present because you got the distinctive tooth. Mammals are monotonously irritating in how specific their teeth forms can get. So if you got a really diagnostic tooth structure, boy, they're there in the same way that if you found a tail light from a 1958 Cadillac buried in the backyard, somehow or other a Cadillac got there. Very, very specific. But how much was going on, and to be able to identify what genes were mutating and all of that, whoops, that tooth ain't going to tell you a hell of a lot about that. Anyway, the various characters that he was bringing up really were directly connecting up to my source methods approach. So I was perfectly happy to have him on my show, but not to have a giant reprise of his stupid discussion about the definition of evolution. And let me do another little screen share here, which old RJ and his stupid thing. Okay, and then we need to put our little file up here. So, greetings, Jim Downard, as the case may be, and he says he's got a really busy schedule, and then he goes on, gave Jackson and the thing, brings out rhinos, and let's consider definition macroevolution over time, and suppose you walked in room on the same clarifies my position. No, it just repeats your position. We already know what your position was. This is absolutely useless. So the thing that was frustrating about it is I had absolutely zero desire to bring him on the show for him to talk about the same crap that he was talking about on your show. That isn't what I was concerned about. I don't want to thrash over definitions of evolution or to prove or verify or falsify evolution either. I want to determine whether or not he has his head up his ass on scholarly method and whether there's any blips at all on his head in his map of time, because both of those are critical components. Jackson's got to run. Bye, Jackson. He's been raptured. So that's the end. I'm on my own. The whole point behind a methods approach is to find out how somebody constructs their own argument. How do they put pieces together? What information do they look at and what do they avoid? Do they do fact checking of things? How easily are they just riffing off of somebody else's opinion? I wanted to ask him about that because as far as I could tell, all he was doing was riffing off of other creationists. And then the other issue, the map of time, which is the great big third point prong in my how people believe things that aren't true systematic, is what do you think happened? The goal of any philosophy, any viewpoint, any hypothesis is ultimately to explain the data. So you want to recognize how much of the data is on their map of time, and then they can offer what arguments they have of it. I don't think there are many blips on Orange's map of time, and that's what I would have wanted to probe during a conversation on my show, not thrash around a thing where I'm not going to discuss any old data until we settle the definition of evolution. There was another creationist, the Cy Vandenbroeke or Brandon Trudy or whatever the hell it is. He was on a show, I think may have been Peter's program just recently, and he just was going augured into the ground. Or maybe it was, oh, no, it was Steve McRae. And he was going exactly that same definition thing. You have to define what truth is. And until you can define what truth is, why, you can't get anywhere with it. And what he wanted was somebody to play on his presuppositional turf. And he just goes around and around and around and around the Mobius strip. It's boring. Anyway, Clade, bye, Clade. You can catch the show in that later. I'll reprise another little thing. The fundraiser that Suris arranged. Oh, boy, is that guy a good news spreader. The fundraiser to get me a new high quality camera, and particularly a microphone that we could record the audio book of the Paralogs of Fog novel, and also in principle Evolution Slam Dunk. We'll probably want to do that too. And all of my work, I'll do my own audiobooks. If arrived today, and the boom. So all of that is in there. I got to assemble everything and attach and plug in and spend the next week making sure everything is okay with that, to make sure my system can handle it all and we're not getting any glitches. So I'm not sure about all of those little hurdles yet, but theoretically in due course we'll have upgraded this stuff, so it'll be a little bit more sophisticated than what we were handling before. And thank you for all the people, because boy, that I was not sure, and he wasn't sure whether or not we would just get a little trickle of donations or whatever, but we had enough in one fell swoop to be able to get all of that. And zingo zongo, the UPS truck dropped the thing off today, the mail truck, and so there it is. So ding dong, and away we're going. Oh, yeah, old scratch, stay away from Steve McRae. McRae is a fascinating character, but he is oddly a presuppositionalist in many ways, and it can be very, very peculiar on there. And one of these days, I'd love to have a discussion with him on a variety of issues of defining what atheism is relative to agnosticism and all of this stuff. And Pete, dear Peter, and I had a long knockdown drag out about that, where I think I figured out that we're talking about two separate things on certain issues. So that's a lot of side digressions. Anyway, so we got the orange material out of the way and some of that stuff. The linkages that I put up about the Rupe and Sanford book relate to a bunch of little green eye shade fiddly bit details that Rupe and Sanford were trying to put in as a these jujitsu arguments to say that Australopithecines are just like normal apes. And one of them involved the sagittal crest. There is a mild sagittal crest, which is a little ridge up on the skull that's used for muscle attachments, that's found more prominently, very prominently in gorillas, but not really so much in chimpanzees and the others. And from that, he's authority quoting, aha, see, they're just ape-like. And I put up several papers that were related, one paper that was relating to one of that one, because all of the links that I would like to put up on this series are open access, so you can read the whole thing. It's not really very useful if I put up just an abstract where, what does that tell you? Technical science abstracts are not useless. They summarize the main content. But what I wanted you to look at, and anyone doing follow-up, is to read the bigger issue, which is all of the content. Find out what's being left out. How fair was it to parse that little teeny bliplet of information? Another one that he parsed had to do with the dentary bone and in the coronoid process that sticks up, that connects up with our jaw. There's actually a double arc, and it's kind of like a little drop off, and there's a little gap in the middle. And this one particular paper from 2007 is arguing that the shape of that is more like that of a gorilla than it is like humans or chimpanzees, which also have the same relatively shallow structure. And therefore, they were arguing that maybe the Australopithecines might actually not be on the direct line to humans after all, or the A. afarensis, this particular species, Lucy. And that was an interesting argument. However, you always have to look at bigger things, which is, why does that shape vary? What are the dynamics of what's going on? Why is there a difference between gorillas and others? And it looks like a lot of that stuff relates to dietary components and the shape of the jaw that's attached to it. And there's so many factors that can bump into one another, that can connect up with other things. Like the example that I gave in Slam Dunk about the platypus, that one of the reasons why platypi are toothless has to do with the fact that they've gotten really adapted to electrolocation, electrosensitivity. They send out a little electric field from that little beak of theirs, which is actually a big flap of skin. And it turns out that the circuits needed to process that go right where the tooth roots are in the jaw, so that expanding the one is at the expense of the other. And since their diet doesn't need to chew, that was the selection pressure that helped make them all toothless. They just drop off the teeth and go after the electrosensitivity. And it all has to do with where the circuit wire runs in relation to where tooth things are. And if you look at fossil ones, you can see the process going on in there. So the idea that there's more to it, that what's going on in this little groove relates to the shape of the jaw behind it and the tooth eruption patterns and all the other things and what they're eating, that animals with relatively strong jaws that might be eating a little bit a heartier diet. And there's still a debate going on how much of a dietary difference there was between the big robust Australopithecines that have really severe strong jaw things compared to the weaker jawed Australopithecines. And so the papers, I think, would be kind of interesting for you to look at. Another one has to do with the little semicircular canal in the ear that's used for balance. And there's been an ongoing issue about how much of that is a clue to how much bipedality is going on. And needless to say, Rupe and Sanford cited an older work way earlier, when they were just starting to do this work back in the 1990s. Alas, the Nature paper was not available full text that I could find anywhere freebie. So I didn't put a link to that. But I did put in some links to follow-up work, which relate to how difficult it is to figure out the exact effect of this. How does balance relate to things for leaping primates? So it turns out Fred Spoor, who was the one that was involved in this 1994 study, is still busy. And so I thought it would be helpful to have one of his 2007 papers going up on general primate things, and then another more recent paper that related to how some of the variables as to which little bend of that semicircular canal might relate to sensing distances and doing other things when you're leaping and all sorts of stuff, and affects the issues of bipedality and how much you have your balance and all that balance sensing. It's more complicated than was implied by the little authority quoting from Rupe and Sanford relating to just that old 1994 paper. And in particular, the most recent one on there is a 2014 one on the comparison between human layout and that of bonobos and chimpanzees, and how we're more like the bonobos, and that probably that relationship does in fact relate to the somewhat more upright stance that bonobos are prone to do compared to their regular chimpanzee cousins. So more opportunities for people to learn stuff. Ooh, Old Scratcher says, what do we know about the evolution of the mammalian diaphragm? Yeah, a little bit of that. Not nearly as much as we'd like. It was sort of an interesting little side issue, and it's popped up in the creationism literature. I alluded to it in Evolution Slam Dunk. They're just starting to kind of work out some of this stuff. It's a tissue split. I'm trying to remember just right off the bat of the kind of thing that was going on, to where it's an offshoot of other processes that are going on. And diaphragms pop up in a lot of different vertebrate forms. You get the comparable things going on with birds, because you have to figure out, if you're going to be an active organism that's pumping air really quick, you got to have a way of doing that. And in mammals, it worked out one way, and in the dinosaur lineage leading into birds, it's got a little different arrangement that they worked out, but they can all do it. And we can know from a hummingbird, no human can match the stamina of a bloody hummingbird for their ability to keep breathing and flitting around and burning up energy like that. But yeah, there's a bit of technical literature on it, and if I could go grab my book if necessary and spend time looking that up, but that would be excessively boring. I'll just do a shameless plug. Buy Evolution Slam Dunk and check the index for diaphragm, and then you can find the listing on it, and you can read the technical literature on that front. So yeah, there's not a huge amount yet working out the detailed developmental biology and genetics of diaphragms. I think some of the, if memory serves me, the most recent work on it is like in the early 2000s. So that it's still an ongoing field. Hi, Peter. Yes, I was just taking your name in vain because I'll want to talk about your like Flurfnurgle example or whatever one of these days with you as to about the issues about the none of the above option in discussing whether or not gods exist and that. I think I figured out where the difference is between the two and why we're talking about two separate items, but that's a separate issue. Anyway, the other little thing that I put up as a cute little teaser beyond just the Rupe and Sanford material was a brand new paper. Remember, I go through the main journal, Science, Nature, and PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, weekly for the TIP project, because there's a mammoth amount of technical literature there. I have over 1,800 technical journals in my data field. And believe me, it's physically impossible to check all of those. So the idea that you could do a full sweep, I rely on my little Twitter connections and scientist linkages and the like, and various people that I encounter to kind of give me heads up on a lot of incoming literature. But you got to hit PNAS, Science and Nature. And I had a wonderful article that Tomasello just did on how kids figure out that other people can have false beliefs and how you can manipulate that for your own purposes. Once you understand that there are people that believe stuff that aren't true, that you can figure out how to make react to that. And it turns out that there's a whole bunch of work that's been done over animals, how they recognize this. It relates to the theory of mind, which is you get to a certain level in cognition, particularly in social animals, where you're starting to realize that inside of that other animal is a mind that's like you, and you have a mind. And it takes a certain level of sophistication in cognition to realize that, and not all animals manage to do it. And so there's a variety of tests, the mirror test and others. If you recognize yourself in a mirror, that's part of a theory of mind and all of that. Peter, since you're going to have Ross on the show, wow. That's an amazing thing, because I had a brief and not spectacular Skype exchange with him for about a half hour or so back in February, I think, and he never posted it at all, probably because he never got anything useful out of me in terms of his apologetics. I think he was trying to think that he was going to come in and make a convert or show the error of my ways on that, and it wasn't working that way. So he got no grist out of it, and I haven't heard back from him since. He's never posted it up on his website, and I doubt rather I'll have any further discussions with him. Yeah, Brian Stevens put up a link there to pnas.org. I first learned about this, to show you a little bit of history. When I was first starting the TIP project, I was hampered by where I was going to find the primary sources. I had a lot of creationist books, and that was in the old days when you had to physically buy the damn thing and then plow down through the references manually. And it's very laborious. And then I would have to figure out where I was going to find these. We have several colleges in Spokane, so I would be able to physically go to their libraries and hunt through their stacks and find the source material. There was really very little in the way of internet. And then a friend of mine who was a cellist in the local symphony happened to say, don't you know the pnas.org? It's online. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And so I was just barely getting, this is dial-up era internet here. So that is another factor of how slow the entry was. But still, it was like suddenly opening a golden door. Holy moly. Because from the get-go, PNAS as a government thing, it's a National Academy of Sciences, After 1 year, everything there is free. So everybody has access to it. And a lot of the papers, particularly pivotal hot issue button items, some of the climate research stuff and some of the big psychological and political ramification things, like we're looking through health issues and the like, those will be posted as freebies from the get-go. So that's one that you definitely want to pay attention to it. Peter says, if he'd known about that, I'd have recorded it for you. Oh, well, such is life. Side 10 as well. Yes, Peter, Jackson and I were talking a little bit about that. That Psi is another one of these hyper presuppositionalists, and one of these that likes to get in their little Mobius strip. In your case, beware of the Psi, because he wants to deal with fundamental assumptions. If he wants to ask you what is truth, define truth, prepare to just, go and do some bricklaying and knit a suspension bridge or something, because you ain't going to get him to move off of that. He's going to want you to define what truth is, and he won't move an inch. Neprika says, what your projections for creationist popularity over the next 10 to 20 years? Probably about the same as it is now, in a sense that we've seen a bit of a decline in support from like 45 to 42 or so in some of the more recent pollings. And that's partly due to demographics, which is that the old cohort that was heavily creationist, that culture camp conservative bloc that fuels the Trumplandia, for one matter, that is passing on. We don't yet know how the millennials and newer ones are going to react to this in the same way. Oh, hello, Cyrus. Hi. Oh, I got to say right off the bat, thank you. Box arrived today. We got the boom mic and the microphone and the camera. They're all in their little things. They all arrived in one fell swoop. And we still got to get them all hooked up and stuff. So pretty soon, with a little luck, I'll look as geeky as you are. With the and I don't have headphones though, so we'll have to work around that kind of little thing to make sure.
Well, you'll be able to just use the headphones you have right now. You would be able to still use them. You would just deactivate the microphone that you have.
Oh, okay. Well, there I'm going to be relying on your expertise in all of that, and I'm sure we're going to have to do resettings on the picture quality and audio setups and all those kind of defaults to make sure, because I am Mr. Jerkbrain Idiot. I want it so that when I go click set up the Google Hangout, that I don't have to go through any rigmarole, boop, 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 and everything, and then I can away to go. Because especially when I'm working long hours and pooped as all get out, setup is something that, this has been a real killer of a week, because when Jackson was here, I would have been discussing this with him, but Jackson had to depart, or he's been raptured or taken by aliens or something. At any rate,
the Canhoven Knights took him.
Yeah. We're doing a big new book on the Answers book, and oh boy, is it fun! And I may be scraping at the hanging on for dear life financially, but I can tell you that I love doing the work, and I love exploring all the material. And Jackson gave me the task of vaporizing the radiometric dating arguments stuff in the books, and I'm going at that with a vengeance, because I want to take Andrew Snelling down and Steve Austin down, and I think I'm doing it. I've already got an example of where Andrew Snelling flat out cites an article as his only source for a technical claim that said exactly the opposite of what he said it did. That's not good. I mean
that's typically what happens though with a lot of creationist arguments, is they'll cite, like for instance, many times they'll cite Charles Darwin and say, oh, well, even Darwin said that the complexity of the eye is so much that it couldn't have possibly been evolved. And then you just go, well, you're right, he did say that. Now, would you like to say the rest of the quote?
Well, in that case, most of those are your quote miner arguments. Those are your bottom feeders. But Snelling's not a bottom feeder. Snelling is a fact claimant. He's up in that. And by the way, I'll mention it again, because it's one of the reasons why the work I'm doing is unique. Nobody else, as far as I know, has ever done this before, because they've not been in a position to do it. I am literally counting and documenting all the primary source technical work that anti-evolutionists have cited over the years. So as I'm doing this new work on Snelling, all of that goes into my tip data field. And so I can tell you how many people are fact claimants, the one that actually cite primary work as their primary arguments. And Snelling is in that bunch, and it's not a big field. There's only about 50 of them. 50 in the entire anti-evolution movement. Everybody else is a secondary redactor. The Kanthovians and all the rest are secondary redactors. I'll point out, too, that Kanthovian and I are supposedly going to have a debate next week on Thursday, the 6th of September. There's a little guy, I've forgotten his name right off the bat. He's on Twitter. He's got a different name in the regular handle, but he was setting this up, and he found out about it via Jackson Wheat and all of that. Anyway, it's going to be a standard style debate of 12 minutes and then a 10-minute rebuttal and then an 8-minute summary and then a half-hour question. So it'll be about an hour and a half altogether. And of course, that's what Kent likes to do because he's got his patter down.
Yep, it
but
gives
I've already
ability
done
to script.
Yeah, and so I'll be reacting to that in my rebuttal, but I've already got my opening prep 12 minutes down, and so I'm all ready to rip on that one. And then I've also got my endpoint done, and then I'll just play with stuff in the middle. Hopefully, we'll get a lot of good people in the Q&A section. The ideal would be that there would be an equivalent number of questions from each side, so that a critic of creationism would be asking Kanthovian something, and a critic of evolution would be asking me something, and we would all show our methods and all of that. But we'll see how well that works out. Anyway, I've been itching to have an interaction with Kent, which has been, the last time was a telephone call that I had with him like in the 1990s. This is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And we'll be alluding to all that stuff. But anyway, the neat thing about the methods approach and what I've been trying to do in my work is to document stuff that hadn't been pinned down before. People rely too much on kind of generic sort of things, to where they say, well, anti-evolutionists don't think about certain subject matter. Well, I don't have to guess at what they don't think about. I can observe what they do or do not discuss. I can see what sources they do and do not cite. So I can get a feel of what's going on. And my data field, if anybody goes to my stupid website and looks at the bibliographies there, do not print them, because they're altogether some 2,000 pages long. That's the reference bibliography. It's like 50,000 sources, and it involves some 25,000 technical papers. So, and growing all of the time. And of all of that big data field, anti-evolutionists are bumping into only about 10% of it. They're missing most of the data field. I don't have to guess at it. So that's when I looked at all of this and decided that I needed to do some new work there, where several people had said to me, take your stuff that you've got on the tip thing and revamp it as a book and sell it, put it on sale on Amazon and all that. And I couldn't in good conscience do that, because if I'm going to take 3 macroevolutionary episodes and slap a price tag on it, you can get it for free. I've already posted it. That's not good. So I got to write something new. And because I now have the data field in the tip project, I can go, what is it no one's done? What is an area that they haven't investigated properly? And it goes reptile mammal transition, because literally nobody had written on that subject before. There's just scattershot. And I'm going, but this is the slam dunk. This is the killer. And anti-evolutionists have their head up their ass on it. So what I did then was to go through, and there's only about 20 some odd anti-evolutionists who have even bothered to bump into the reptile mammal transition, although it's most of the heavy guns. Dwayne Gish and John Woodmarapp on the creation side. And then you've got the intelligent design bunch technically discuss it in their various books, from Philip Johnson to Steve Meyer, and in his book Explore Evolution, and Bill Dembski and Jonathan Wells retreading of pandas and people, and then Michael Denton. Oh, Michael Denton. That was the coup de grace, because Denton's new book, Evolution, a Theory Still in Crisis, came out just as I was starting work on Slam Dunk. And I knew, oh boy, I gotta have that book. And I couldn't afford it. So Glenn Branch of the NCSE kindly bought it temporarily for me. He bought it for the NCSE, but had it shipped to me I then went through and culled the information out of it and then shipped it to the NCSE. So the copy that went under my eyeballs is now on a shelf somewhere in Oakland or wherever. And that allowed me to pick it up. Oh, Nepicross. Oh, I think we're getting a feedback. Are you dimmed on your end? The Nepicross asks, reptile mammal transition sounds tough because let's face it, laymen don't really get how you get from scaly friends to furry friends, myself especially. Well, Nepicross, that's an excellent reason for buying Evolution Slam Dunk, says the author cravenly, so that he can get some royalties off of it. But the intriguing thing is, first, the reason why the RMT, and I would like to reach the stage when people can use it as an acronym so they don't have to say reptile mammal transition all the time, is that it's chock-a-block with data points. That you've got your nice garden variety reptiles, and I point out systematically, no, they're not the reptiles that we're used to with lizards. They're the basal amniotes from which the diapsid line split off, and I have a whole little brief section in the beginning of the book where I call attention to that because all of your cladistic analysis people would dump on me for that very reason. But Christine Janis had no problem with it. She's a mammal paleontologist, and she was okay with how I described it, because who wants to say basal amniotic synapsid to mammal transition? I mean, too many words. And we know pretty much what a reptile-y thing looks like. So within the limits of the definitions of where I was describing it, I kept with that nomenclature. And it's still described as the reptile-mammal transition, even by some technical people. But all the work that had been done on it was really basically known to other mammal paleontologists. They're not sexy. They're little critters that look like weird frog-like things and oddball, kind of not quite crocodiles, and they're not terribly large. Although everybody knows one of them, Dimetrodon, the one with the little fin back, that pops up in the dinosaur sets. That's on our synapsid line of the site. But when you get down,
favorite things.
Yeah, and that's terribly ironic to bring that one up. That's very early in the mix. And if you look at it, if you remove the fin and just look at the anatomy and look at its jaw structure and all that, it's very hard to tell from other diapsid reptiles, other than the fact that you could look for the 2 skull openings or the 1 skull opening. And it's got the 2 skull openings, you go diapsid. And if it's got only the 1, bingo, it's a synapsid. And the thing that's neat about it is that they are the dominant land animals in the Permian. We tend to think about the cliche with the dinosaurs is that mammals are this little trivial little bunch that were skimpering around behind the feet of the dinosaurs, which was true. But that hadn't always been the case, to where if you look back before the dinosaurs took over, back in the Permian period up to the late Triassic, it's the therapsids, the synapsid line, that are the dominant ones. They're the major predators. They're the major herbivores. Almost every big critter that you can see in the Permian is a therapsid. And there are just these little minor lineages of diapsids scraping around. And the things that will eventually become the archosaurs and will develop the dinosaurs and all of that 100 million years later, they're just small potatoes. So we have a very long, detailed fossil record to go on, as you're seeing this bunch gradually become more and more mammalian in some of the lineages that eventually lead to mammals. And there's things about the jaw and then the ear and all of this stuff in here. A crocosquirrel there. Didn't Dimetrodon also have longer teeth in the front where canines are today? Yeah, that's one of the big things that distinguish your synapsids from diapsids, is they went for differential teeth. And clearly there's genetic mutations going on deep down in the things that make teeth that occurred in the diapsid line, synapsid line differently. Diapsids stay monotonous, that what you get is lots and lots of the same format of teeth. You don't have this molar canine differentiation that you find in mammals. And so that dentition, that ability to have specialized teeth, became one of the hallmarks of mammals, to the point where you can identify mammals by their teeth with unbelievable ease, and they're very durable. So like shark teeth, teeth are often the last that it remains for something. So if you have a little blip of a teeth showing up in a deposit, even though there's no body attached to it, you can tell that certain groups of mammals were running amok because you got their little teeth in there. The other aspect has to do with all that shape of the jaw and the jaw transition. I did a video on that, And it's such a spectacular thing. You've got predicted fossils and the developmental biology. You've got the genetics. You've got such a huge array of technical literature. And I'm going, why isn't this better known? Why aren't we talking about this? You know, I mean, it's fine to bring up Tiktaalik and Archaeopteryx and Australopithecines. They're all very relevant. Pakicetus for whales. You've got a lot of fossil transitions that are very relevant. But the reptile mammal is full-blown vertebrate class. That's at the next group below phylum. That's not a minor detail. And if you know the bird side of things well and the mammal sides of things, look what you've just done. Because in the last 250 million years, there have only been 2 vertebrate classes that have appeared in life, and that's the mammals and the reptiles, or mammals and birds. And so if you've got those nailed in terms of your understanding of how they developed, and they make a nice little bookend set, because the very processes that are producing hair from the skin placodes that produce scales in reptiles are also producing feathers in birds. And there's a huge technical literature on that. And we've got things about the developmental biology, and that brings up all that stuff. So the very same toolkit, bone morphological protein and sonic hedgehog and all these other gene structures that are involved in the formation of hair also relate to feather evolution. So that comes up. And also because Michael Denton shot his mouth off a lot on that. So I've got a bunch of discussions of feather evolution and the technical literature there in Evolution Slam Dunk. Yet more plug for the reason why this is a gold mine. I've got like 2,300 sources in the bloody little thing. What else do we have on in here? Brian says scales can form on humans that have the polycythemia. Boy, I'm just going to slaughter that word. Vera gene. Remember, you've got the substrates of things buried in all organisms. So we have skin integuments, and they're made from pretty much the same stuff. Scales come about from a very particular set of variations that have occurred, and if there's papers by Alibardi in particular that if you look up feather evolution in Wikipedia and dinosaurs, you'll find links to all of that stuff. And Alibardi, I'll type his name in here.
Just remember that Wikipedia is more reliable than AIG.
Oh yes, a pile of dried sticks is more reliable than AIG, I'm afraid. But if you can find Alibardi's paper, you don't even have to worry about. I mean, not that I don't want you to buy Evolution Slam Dunk. I want everybody in the world to own the damn book. I'd even have a tiny slice of people owning the book. Will make me happy. But you can look in the bibliography at my tip website and do a little text search for Alibardi, and his works will pop up. Because of the name search on there. And it's stuff that's been done in the last 10 years about the genetics and developmental biology of skin integuments and skin placodes, and how the different way they bump and form little wave forms and little shapes that blob over is the thing that produces scales and feathers and hair, depending upon what other genes kick in at which particular points. And there's a huge amount of material on there. Nepicross says, lately, Paul Price, I guess a big shot at AIG or whatever, has been running around on Reddit trying to get into arguments, the lengths people go. Yeah, I have no arguments with people getting into arguments. That so long as you remember the purpose of the discussion. I'm going to be supposedly debating Kent Hovind next week, 6th of September. We'll see whether or not that actually transpires or not. But the object is not to persuade the creationist or even the diehard creationist watching that they're wrong. The object is to A, stand up for the facts and the truth and sound method, B, to try to show by your behavior that you've got your ducks in a row and the other guy doesn't. And it's usually a guy, although one of these days maybe I'll bump into George Purdom. I have bumped into Ann Gager, who's an intelligent designer, a very amiable person. And this is another issue that's highly relevant, is that a great many of the core anti-evolutionists are decent, amiable people. They're not nasty. They're not virulent. They're not Bible thumpers. That bump you may bump into down in the lower level of somebody haranguing you at the state fair, but it won't be the kinds of stuff you bump into at Answers in Genesis Technical Journal or the Institute for Creation Research Acts and Facts postings, or the various defenders. They have a patina of science and a kind of scholarly manner, and move over to intelligent design, and holy moly, they're just a pile up of suited pleasant academic types.
Well, they're incredibly ever since, and I think Kent Hovind actually really did write the book on that. Was just how to be a very charismatic individual while lying through your teeth, because he has it to an extent. Ken has it. Ken can be a very Ken Ham can be a very joking character if you've watched any of his if you watch any of his stuff. If you see Creation today, you see, and I actually was like 10 minutes away from their studio, so I really should have gone, or warehouse rather.
Lucky duck!
I really should have gone there. But unfortunately, Eric was not in town because he was doing an event for Creation today. But Eric, too, is incredibly charismatic. Like, they're people who you could see yourself sitting in a cafe, just having a cup of coffee with and just having a conversation with for a while. They are, I would say that they are the poster children for poster children.
Yeah, you have a thing where they have a kind of folksy charm about them. They know how to appeal to their audience.
And
they
practiced type of rhetoric.
Yeah. Oh, let me put in I need to put in my shameless plug here, and also remind everybody that who has helped the operation. There's my stupid screen share. I am pathetically slow on all of these things. I plead guilty. The tip patrons: Stephen and Mary Gale and Dyer and Andrew and Eat and Yui and Mona and Hendril and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Eric and Benjamin and Steigels and Alex Stone and you, Sarah. Thank you. And Totus Real and Everett Vincent and Paul Williams. See, these are real, actual people who plunk down real, actual money to say that my project is actually not crap and it's important and it's making a difference, at least one tiny little increment at a time. There's my website. There's the Patreon site, although I will point out Patreon is slow as molasses on lower echelon people like me to get money. If you really want to help the project in a hurry, please GoFundMe.com. DCGo is the place to go because I get that like in a couple of days. And sometimes it's the difference between me having spaghetti to eat or not from one day to the next. Okay, well, there's the shameless plug. And the main thing is that there is a method to my madness, and it's the constant refrain that source methods sounds geeky, but it's the killer app. And I think anybody that's seen Pelagia's video, you're seeing a source methods guy. He was figuring it out on his own, and then he discovered my work, and he goes, yeah, even more so. And finding that by us upping our game to explore source methods, which is not a natural thing to do. You got to be taught to do it. Even Jackson, who is a source methods guy, when you get into the push and shove of discussion, the urge is to go to the data floor. There's 3 layers of thinking here. One is the philosophy level, and presuppositionalists, they want to climb up into the clouds and talk about definitions and all this kind of stuff. And boy, they get around and around the mulberry bush on that one, and you can waste hours that way. And everybody has seen people do it. The data floor involves all of those data blips. And whether or not it's done by a creationist or not, or by a regular scientist, there's still things. There's the gene, there's the rock, there's the fossil, the physical things that you can look at, the technical work that you can look at. That's the data floor, and it's a big data floor. I'm barely scratching the surface on it, and I've got 25,000 technical papers in my data set, and written by 63,000 scientists. I'm not guessing, I'm counting. Ooh. Anyway, below that is the meat of what I'm talking about with the methods approach, which is how much of that data floor are you looking at? How fair are you with that data floor? I don't care what your philosophy is. If you quote a source that doesn't exist, that's bad dog. If you quote a source and the text isn't in there, that's bad dog. If you quote a source and it says the opposite of what you just said it did, that's bad dog. And I don't care what philosophy you have, whether you're a pro or anti-evolutionist, what level of intelligence, how many PhDs you do or do not have, that methodology analysis showing that level of iniquity is, you're off the map. You haven't earned a place at the table. And you'll find that people who believe things that aren't true have a single blob of bad methods procedures that are popping up again and again and again. And so by coming at its source methods first, you're detecting that right before they get to the data floor. Now, the more you know about the data floor, the happier a camper you can be, because you've got all that information available to know tactically when to drop the anvil and what anvils to drop. But that comes from experience and that. And everybody can theoretically play this game way easier. One of the things that I'm going to be bringing up with Kent Hovind is that it was hard to do source analysis of Kent Hovind in the 1990s when I was first bumping into him, because there was no internet material, that I'd have to go to libraries and track stuff down. I'd have to find out what else did he say? How many videos would I have to watch to find out what his work is? Has he printed anything? Where would I find them? How can you track down stuff when you got that fog bank? Now, posted. They put their postings online. They posted the papers. You've got the technical literature. You can find it. You can Google search it. You can find out who's talked about it. Ooh, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Somebody's already discussed this particular issue. Let me look at their argument. All of that can be done at blinding speed compared to what I was doing. Yeah,
speaking of that, I was actually blamed in my most recent video because I did another Dangers of Woo episode tackling healing crystals of all things. I was actually, there was a comment on my video that said, it seems that anytime RJ appears on a channel, they get infected with the source methods bug. Apparently I unknowingly did it because I had like not a lot of primary ones, but I did have a lot of sources that were linked in my description. And one of the things I called the person out on was they would say things like, oh, crystals are always vibrating and these vibrations do this. And I was like, well, you're right. Quartz vibrates at a frequency of 32,000 hertz. However,
yeah, we put them in our watches.
Yeah, but even though you have that, that doesn't mean that you can then say, oh, then this. So I linked a whole bunch of articles about that. And then there were also things like, oh, place these rocks around here. And I'm like, well, unless that rock is magnetic or radioactive, it's not going to do anything to you. And just like...
And I'll tell you, let me confirm my suspicion that in the course of you investigating that, you now know more than you did to start with.
Yes. I didn't even realize... Like, I knew that at the time, there was a claim that she said that crystals are the most stable structure in the universe. And I was like, hold on, let me look this up. And I'm like, that's not an incorrect statement in that most crystals are solids and solids are the most stable structures in the universe. But I'm like, but that's still a wrong statement in what it implies. And it's just a bunch of stuff that I didn't know when I started making the video.
Bingo. The source methods is a win-win situation in dealing with anybody woo, because you will find out why they're being woo. You'll see where they're overlooking information, why they're relying on some nincompoop that they should never have done. That's why you want to ask what their sources are. Where are you getting this information from? Find it handy, and how did you check it? And in the course of you looking things up, then you learn an enormous amount that you didn't know. You're enriched by the process. The other factor is when you get to be an old fart like me, to where I've gotten to the stage where I'm way ahead of people. You have any idea how many anti-evolution works I have in my bibliography? 8,800. Written by 2,300 people. It's a lot. So it's the point where I often have read more of the creationist material than the creationist has. And that means that I can, by asking the right questions and looking at the right data fields, you can get them and see where they are. And oh, there they are, right over that giant trapdoor that they don't even know is there. Pull lever, which you won't be able to do if you don't know that data field.
Not to mention that's also a tactic that you learn if you've ever taken a course in debate. Never debate somebody who has a position that you yourself cannot articulate.
Yeah, yeah.
That's one of the things they
describe it. And you need to be able to describe your own position. One of the great lessons in life was the one that James Burke, the guy that did the Connection series, arguably for me, the most influential science series I ever saw in my life, and not nearly enough people know about it. And some young people will look at it, and I've seen them where they're going, boy, this is kind of slow. And I'm going, forget the pacing. Think about the content. It's that it's the goal of the science educator. Anything that can be understood can be explained. That's the purpose of it. And my corollary is, if you can't explain it, you don't understand it. So if you can't explain what your position is, and if you can't fairly represent what your opponent's position is, so you understand where they're coming from on this kind of a thing, it makes me more charitable in one area. Once I looked at how anti-evolutionists constructed their arguments over the years, it became really obvious that brilliant people were suffering from cranial blockage of the rectum. And it dawned on me that very few of these instances of dumb were, I think, because of conscious lying or prevarication. The only areas where things get really dicey is if somebody is got a little telltale ... in there, their ellipses, and what they pulled out is so tactically precise that it's, if they put it in, would undermine their argument. That's mendacious. And you find examples of that. Relatively few character strings are ever in error in anti-evolutionists. Anti-evolutionists are anal retentive copyists. They copy it down exactly, and that sometimes can be their undoing. That's how I'm going to skewer, hopefully, Kent Hovind next week, is because of the fact that he copied it, or rather his minion copied it way too accurately, and so I was able to determine exactly where he got his source material from. But only once in a while do you find instances of where quotes are actually non-existent, and those can become telltale, because you can have somebody that made the original bad reference, they muddled something together, and then that takes on a life of its own in quote mines as it gets copied from one thing to another. That was a case where Jackson Wheat had bumped into Matt Powell, who's a Hovindista, another secondary redactor, where he was quoting a non-existent Carroll quote of Robert Carroll, the paleontologist, and it traced back to a Henry Morris misrepresentation way back in the 1970s that then got metastasized through the quote mines that eventually filter through wherever it was Matt Powell copied it. And so it gives you a sense of smug confidence, because now you're not having to scramble. The worst situation to be in is to have to play catch up, to where the guy or the gal that you're dealing with is sandbagging you with some claim you've never heard before. Are you going to do a quick Google search on the fly and try to research this thing at depth, real time? Hell, you'll be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes down the road. You've missed your opportunity. So those are the things you can do post hoc, and you certainly want to do, fill in those, but because I've often bumped into cases where somebody brings up some little piece of claptrap I haven't seen before, and I make a point of researching it. But the ideal situation is to know what the major claptrap is. And especially when you're dealing with somebody with a track record like Kent. I mean, this guy repeats himself a lot. Anybody that's bumped into standard creationists should know by now that they're not very innovative. They're not really quick on the draw. They're repeating the same things they've done over and over and over again. Isn't that what you've seen, Cyrus?
Yeah, typically it depends on which kind of creationist you're going at. If you're dealing with a strictly young earther, they're typically going to go with the efficacy of carbon dating, and they're going to strictly use carbon dating until you call them out on it, and then they're going to say, "Oh well, radiometric dating isn't accurate either," and then they'll go down
assumptions. It's got assumptions,
and then they'll go down the line of different types of. They'll basically do the same thing they have issues with carbon dating. Carbon dating can't be used for things past the 50,000 year mark, pretty much. Once you get into the radiometric side, though, there's so many different isotopes that we use for radiometric dating. They'll just pull one of the ones that can't be used for the argument and say, well, they dated it with this and it came out this way. And like, yes, because just like with carbon dating, you're using the wrong method. But you'll see that. And then if you go even further down the line, if you go like one step above the young Earth creationists, you've got the gap theorists, which I'm sure you've dealt with before.
Yeah, the old age squishy one. And those bump into map of time in a different way. The one really revealing thing that I discovered in my analysis related to systematics, that only young Earth creationists talk about kinds. Old Earth creationists don't really bother about that much, and intelligent designers, oh, you boy, they just shy away from that completely. No systematics is done by you, Ross, Bunch, or anybody at the Discovery Institute. We have no clue what they think is going on at all. They reject common descent almost entirely, and yet they don't say how organism X came to be.
Well, and the thing you always get to do in that situation, though, when you're dealing with a young earther, I've almost always seen this tool used, and it's always been effective every single time, is you say, can you please give me a hard definition of kind?
Yeah, and here there's another one where one of the things that I'm trying to get more people onto, and if you get my book, You'll have a variety of issues about the baraminology movement and creationist systematics, or lack of it. It pops up over and over again in the book because it bears on this kind of issue of what is a kind. And there is, I'll summarize it because it's an easy thing to get. Traditionally, kind meant the family level. But if you proceed as if that's okay, you know, you look at the family of cats or the family of dogs or the family of bears and all that, and it's easy to do. And even today, dogs and cats, those are the ones they bring up naturally because they're familiar animals. Everyone knows what they look like. If you do that, then we're in the primate family with Bonzo the chimp. Uh-oh, we can't have that. So the moment they start thinking about it closely, they now have to use a double standard. It's the family level, more or less, and even the baraminologists kind of stick with that. And if you look at the Answers in Genesis, the Ark Encounter Museum, and see their little lists of kinds, I wish I could get a high-resolution picture, and they've never posted the list online, so I can't read it specifically. But it was clear enough in the picture that I could see that I could count the number of listings, and you could see the headings. The picture was clear enough that you could see extinct mammal-like things and so forth, but you couldn't tell what the actual listings were, just the number of them. And I counted them all up, but methodically. It looks like they're using the family level at the Ark Encounter for just about everything. But I'd like to see the specific list, because I know very little work has been done on the therapsids. So where did they get their bloody list from? Are they relying on Leitner for the birds? And how are they dealing with human beings? And do they list Australopithecus sediba in with the human holobaramin the way Wood did in one of his papers? And everyone was in the creationism movement that was paying attention to it was going, what?
I think typically you get the same issue when they do that as you have with the gap theorists, where they just basically say that, well, humans are special, and that's kind of the end of that argument, because that's the entire thing that the Jehovah's Witnesses gap theory falls onto as well, because they're old earthers for the most part, but they also allow you to have a 6,000-year-old human line somehow, and that 6,000-year-old human line came up ex nihilo, and that only exists in freaking gap theory, and it's weird.
Yeah, well, and William Jennings Bryan falls into that same boundary layer. Theoretically, he was okay with ancient Earth, no problem. But if you read through the transcript of the Scopes trial, you'll discover that every time Darrow tried to pin him down on chronology and the Bible, that for all practical purposes, Bryan was a young Earth creationist. He envisaged humans popping up 6,000 years ago and not earlier. And so his mental time frame was functionally young Earth creationist, even though he was willing to argue that mountain ranges and stuff might have been around, or there might have been some kind of life earlier. So there's a terrible, if they tried to think it through and to actually say what they thought happened, that would be map of time, they would start getting into a mess. And don't hold your breath that you, Ross, or any of that bunch is ever going to do it, or anybody at the Intelligent Design movement is ever going to do it, because it's an intractable problem. I do give the poor little creationist props, because they do try. I mean, you've got the little baraminologists. They're getting in there swinging. It's turning into an absolute mess when they try to do it, because they have to flush data down the drain and or tie themselves into knots. The most amusing thing to me was that Kent Hovind, just a couple years ago, was proclaiming in one of his little blog posts about that silly horse sequence, this idiotic horse sequence that's just completely wrong. And he is apparently unaware that Wood and Kavanaugh accepted the entire horse sequence as a monobaramin, which means all of it's a natural branching evolutionary lineage within the alleged bigger kind that they didn't quite pin down. Does he not read creationist literature? And probably not. That's the irony of it.
Well, that's the thing about Kent Hovind, is that he's got, and I forget who somebody actually had a Google Drive link at one point that I wish I had access to, where it had they had all of his slides, like a lot of the ones that he classically used years ago, and he still uses a lot of them today.
Yeah.
What he does is he hears not the creationist move. He hears not what the creationist is saying, but he tries to pick and choose what an evolutionist is saying, and then he tries to take that and fit it into his little worldview. It's essentially the same way that you find quote mining. That's typically what Kent does. Yeah. He doesn't really read through creationist literature, because most of the time creationist literature is actually like one level above Hovind.
Oh, in the case of Hovind, it's 4 or 5 levels above Hovind. Hovind's a bottom feeder. He's always been a bottom feeder. And he doesn't look up stuff. He has no curiosity. I'll be pointing out all of this in my 12 minutes. I have it all lined up on things that we'll see how well this little approach works or not. Because I have no doubt whatsoever about how agile he is. Oh, by the way, on the other thing I was talking about the horse, it was Ken Ham that I was actually referring to there. If I said Hovind by mistake, I didn't mean to, but yeah, it was Ken Ham on that. Although Hovind denies the horse sequence too, and I don't know that Hovind, as far as I can tell, Hovind doesn't read baraminology stuff much either. That's popped up as a little side issue on there. Anyway, we're past the hour on that one there. I put my little blurb up on that. So from the weird land of Spokane and the evolution hour, there's another one out of the way. I hope that more people get on the bandwagon on things, tell people about it. It doesn't do diddly squat what I do here. I'm going to be a ghost in the wind if the thing doesn't take hold and people don't use it. It's a method that works. And anybody that follows me on Twitter by now should have spotted that I often don't get much pushback from creationists on my questions. And that's a reason why, because I'm asking questions they can't answer. There are issues that they can't deal with because I'm exposing their Tortugan ruts, and they can't respond on those levels. You get this deer in the headlight moment, and suddenly there's silence on there. And in the Twitter thing, you just have kind of like it goes off the feed for a while. And the ones that are the most annoying, of course, are the ones that just can't get past their little tropes. They've got the rote routine. They can't have a conversation on data. They can't explain anything. And the more we force them onto that methods turf, the harder it's going to be for them, the more difficult it's going to be. Nobody needs, the idea behind the whole Science Strike Force network is the idea that no individual needs to know everything. But collectively, if you're connected up with a bunch of people to where you're saying, hey, I'm going to be discussing something with so-and-so. Does anybody know anything about that? And collectively, you can be armed to say, well, you should check this out, and this would be something to look at, and this is where this idiot said that. That's why Jackson was so happy that I saved him a bunch of time when he was trying to deal with the creationist. They brought up a particular thing about a particular source citation, and he had to try to look it up. And he was asking me about it after the fact. Whereas if I had bumped into that person live, I would have instantly known what they were talking about and would have been able to respond real time. And the more we can get to that stage of prep, it's way easier when we're dealing with a creationist with a paper trail or a video trail. So if they do a lot of postings, if they've done a lot of writing, then you can look up their material and do prep work on it and have an idea of what they're going to say. And typically, because they're so boringly repetitive, the odds of them coming up with something fresh in front of you is really remote.
If I might actually add something you can do as well, just a little tool in your arsenal that can help. Get to know prolific people on the other end of the movement who are not anti-evolutionist. So, for instance, one of my go-tos is Dr. Sygart. Anytime that somebody tries to say, oh, well, you can't have the Bible and this, and I'm like, well, then why is Sygart, who I'd argue is smarter than me and whoever I'm arguing with at the time, then how is he able to square those two things? That make sense to me. And typically you get the same deer in the headlights movement there. And it's the same type of weapon that the quote miners use, technically, is the thing the quote miner tries to do is they try to find somebody from your camp and quote them in a way that supports them. Just use the same weapon against them, but the difference is that you're doing it honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You'll typically be able to
and the object should be to account for the data. So that means you have to have an idea of what the data are. You have to have a sense of what you think is going on. For the very, you can remember what you need to do in terms of how to use sources for what they are intended to be. You can read a Jerry Coyne analysis like why evolution is true, and it's perfectly fine. But don't regard that as the end goal. That's just a springboard. Wikipedia is useful. I use it all the time because I can tell what's kind of on the field and what isn't. But I don't use it as the destination. I use it as a springboard. I eventually want to ground it in primary source information. There's probably the one area that's the murkiest is religious apologetics, because a lot of these issues about ancient documents and who knew what back in first century Palestine, a lot of this stuff is only being discussed in blogs And it's not immediately accessible in a lot of the openly accessible technical literature, because a lot of the journals aren't necessarily available online. They're out there. There's the kind of tradition that Bart Ehrman would be drawing on, but a lot of these things aren't easily accessible. Hopefully that will change. One area that proved to be really delightful is that the Mormons put their technical journals, their in-house apologetic journals, up online about maybe 10 years ago or so. Yay! Because now we get to peek under their hood too and look and see what arguments, because then you can see what they're doing and what they're discussing and what not. So everybody can find an area. I'm a universalist. Boy, I bite off a lot because almost everything gets trampled on in the anti-evolution movement. So I have to cover so much in order to be comprehensive. But then again, at the same point, I learn a lot. So I know way more now than I did 10 years ago, and way, way more than I did 20 years ago. So there's our dead silence on there. Let's look in the last feed there on anyone here know if the Brian asked, anyone here know if the caps lock Christian is a troll, a parody, or serious?
It's definitely a parody account. It is 100% a parody account.
Yeah. I'm a literalist in the sense that I take everybody at face value initially, unless proven otherwise. So I assume that anything anybody says, they mean. And if they're using it, sometimes you can finally get the gist that they're doing it with a little bit of a twist. So you realize they're parodying the thing, and it's like the Miss Manners and stuff like that, Betty Manners or whatever it is. It does such a ruthless parody on the culture camp conservatives and that, or for that matter, Stephen Colbert it would have been an example of a very depth parody of a particular type of mindset. Slug Bugford, whatever they did as of Alex Jones now. And those are something, they're the equivalent of an April Fool's joke. They can kind of throw you off a little bit. But in all areas, my goal is to ground everything in the primary source technical literature, and that would include scholarly material. So the more you can, archaeology stuff, a lot of that's going to show up in some of the journals that are a little more accessible online, and or will be available in various college postings or through ResearchGate or Academia EDU. There's a lot of different venues you can poke around to find stuff. And if you can get contacts in particular areas where they say, hey, can you get me this paper? And they can do it, or they can tell you about stuff. So everybody, the idea is that we build a big network of people through both video and social media, where when anything wacky comes up, it can be put in front of people in such a way that we can respond to it efficiently. A thing that I'm still lurking on is there's a local, well, not local, they're a regional creationism area in the Pacific Northwest, and they do a gathering of creationists every year in Seattle. And the next one's scheduled for October. And what I'm hoping, they haven't settled a date or a venue yet, so we don't know where the hell it is. I keep on looking every once in a while. And it's free to the public. Well, I'm a public. And so the idea is that we would have some atheists and the like, and pro-science people to go in with my methods approach to this. P.Z. Myers had done an assault with his approach, which was that they would have like a protest outside, and then they would have a counter show going on in a nearby venue where they would be talking about pro-evolution material. From my point of view, that's a huge wasted opportunity.
Well, at that point, you're just preaching to the choir, though, because you're
exactly. That's why it's a wasted opportunity. What I want to do are multiple things. First of all, I want to be able to attend the speeches of the creationists at these things. I want to see those, and then I want to do what I call an enfilade, which is to have several people who are just acting as observer conversationalists who move around through the exhibits in between the speeches, where we're looking at the stuff on display and we're talking about them. And others are actually doing their little live feed smartphone thing where they're actually documenting this. They're not part of the conversation. They're just acting as observers of our observations. And so we can then come in and say, oh, that Dwayne Gish book, Evolution, the Fossils Still Say No. Gosh, that was terrible work. And we're talking back and forth. And maybe the person at the vendor is saying, well, what do you mean that's a terrible work? It says, oh, haven't you fact-checked his material? Haven't you look it down through this, you know, like in his dinosaur section, he has only 1 or 2 references for this, and this is all completely wrong material. Haven't you ever bothered it? And now you can use it as an engagement, always remaining pleasant and not confrontational and all the rest. And I'd like to see how well that works or not. And whether or not, if it's done low-key enough, whether there can't be any throw you out because you're not getting into arguments, you're just having conversations. I don't know how. No one's done that. But I think the protest signs and then go have a lecture next door is not the right approach to it.
No, you're not. The thing that you want to do with a protest is you want to be vocal, but you want to be vocal in a way that you're seen. And if you're just having something at a separate venue, then you're not being seen. And if you're not being seen, why are you even challenging it? That's why there's a whole issue with the legality of certain protests in certain areas, like how you can't protest certain establishments near the establishment where the protest needs to happen in the first place for it to even be effective. Sometimes it's not really an issue. Like with the Ark Encounter, you can protest very near it, and it's not a huge issue there. But I think the Ark Encounter protest is the model way to do it. If you're going to have an outside of the venue protest, make yourself visible, put yourself out somewhere on a highway, and have it set up to where, hey, there's free food, come here, have a chat. There's going to be guest speakers. There's going to be stuff you can do, but you don't want to book a whole separate venue outside because then you're no longer visible. You're no longer doing anything.
You can't be where they are. The whole point of a source methods approach is to document and observe the bad methodology of the people you're criticizing. You can't do that next door. You got to be right there with them. And I would wager that there will be lots of people who you will be able to engage with one-to-one. A lot of them are very personable. Mike Riddle is very personable. I never had any problem chit-chatting with him when he was doing his Answers in Genesis show here in Spokane. He was more than willing to talk with the infidel about the stuff. Where you were getting a little bit of the problem was all of the church people around wanting to gang up on the infidel. And they were actually the bigger source of awkwardness, especially since it was just like me. I wasn't there with other people. I'm just me. And the idea being that you want to have this being documented. When I was doing that, that was way back in 2010 when the smartphones and things didn't exist the way we do now. But so many people have those available. And so long as they make sure that their damn battery was charged fully beforehand, that you can have a tag team approach to things where you can have the stuff live streaming and you can have people tweeting, somebody whose whole job it is to say, ooh, RJ's asking about so-and-so, and the other person is answering back and all that. You can do umpteen different ways of doing things, all invisibly, quietly, because that's what the technology allows you to do. Isn't that fun?
Not to mention, it prevents you from having the huge issue of there's the stereotype of the angry atheist who just hates God, which isn't an atheist, BT dub, that's a mesotheist. Please get that right. But you have that whole stereotype, and when you're being the vocal nuisance, as it were, at one of those establishments or at one of those talks, all you're doing is reinforcing that stereotype. It's the same issue with putting a separate venue. You can either be invisible by making a separate venue, and that's useless, or you could be visible but not helping. And being the angry atheist causing a ruckus is also not helping.
Well, it's useful to have some useful Q&A in the sense that if you have some people that can ask very probing, targeted questions, and once again, have somebody documenting it. So this becomes the thing where you're not only looking at the question, you want to see what the person who is the speaker has to say about it and to put it on the record. Either you get the deer in the headlight movement or whatever. And you're not going to have an argument with them, but you're documenting a data point. And we want to change the dynamic of what data points are put on the field. And that hasn't been done, in my view, at all effectively, in part because way too few people are using a source methods approach. They're going at it from data floor and philosophy, and they're missing all these opportunities. So anyway, that's the little sneaky little plan that I have afoot, which I'm so sneaky, I'm talking about it publicly. And we'll see whether or not anything happens on that. First, they got to get the date settled. There are a bunch of people over on the coast, theoretically, that might be able to help with this. And I'd want to make sure we do like a rehearsal So we have it down to where we know the skill set involved. Our rehearsal, I know exactly where I would do it. I do it in a grocery store, not where we're talking about the fruit. And to show that we can do gently and quietly a discussion about the produce in such a way that that's functionally what we would be doing, except we're not changing it into a different venue where we're now walking amongst the tables and stuff that's on display at the thing. Anyway, there were, my gosh, we're almost 20 minutes past the hour on that. And I've got grand plans for the way we need to change our behavior in ways that will be more effective. And because this is important shit. We're living in a time when science is being threatened in ways that I never thought would ever happen within my lifetime. And the battles that we should have won long ago are still being fought in this day and age. Good gravy. There are people who think the earth is flat in 2018. Holy moly. Yeah, Lord Crocus World. Yes, yep. Yeah. Although you got to keep your little temper down, buckaroo. You got to learn to be genteel and pleasant about it. And there are we would ideally want to engage with the open engager types who are they're absolutely convinced what they're saying is true, and they're willing to have a perfectly legitimate conversation about it, and to try to explore that to find out what's going on in their heads as a way to illuminate that methods issue. So that's the end of my little diatribe on there. I put up my shameless plug for things. Please, if you haven't gotten Evolution Slam Dunk, get Evolution Slam Dunk. And then Cyrus and I will be thrashing over in the next bits to get all my new equipment is. And I will say again, thank you, Cyrus. You are one hell of an advertiser and coordinator, kid.
Do not thank me exclusively. You also have to thank the people who actually donated and came to the stream.
Absolutely. But Buckaroo, you're good at spreading the word and putting the seeds in place. I was worried easily that this might take a bunch of trials to be able to scrape up enough money, but blast, wow. We did it just in one show.
No, and ironically, it was, and I know that this is exactly where a creationist would come in and say, God was looking out for you. But ironically, to get all of RJ's equipment, literally every single piece needed, and I showed RJ the amount that we earned on the stream and the amount that the entire set cost. It costed $199 and like 95 cents, I think, for all of your equipment, and we earned $199. And
yeah, the Lord wants RJ to be able to record the paralogs of fog in proper sound, and we will, once we get that under our belt, because I'll probably still be working on the second fog novel. I'll want to work with you to do Evolution Slam Dunk in an audiobook format. That'll require a big revamp, but I'm game for it because wow, why can't we have science on the road as well as mystery science fiction?
Oh, definitely. I will say, unfortunately, YouTube did take their cut of a third of everything that came out of the stream.
That was like, whoa, boy, are they greedy little bastards.
True, but I can't complain since we ended up with exactly what we needed.
Yeah. Well, and that's why GoFundMe has always been useful, because they take a tiny little percentage. It's a small amount. And so it's basically a light service charge on there, and I can't complain about that. Plus, you can set up so many of the parameters. People can do recurring things. Anybody like it that can plump out $60 a year, do it at $5 a month. They can do that at GoFundMe. They can set it up any kind of a structure to an automatic thing. Ye gods, if I could get 100 people to do that, I'd be able to buy ink once in a while. Food, I get off my spaghetti ration. Boy, it was the old days when I could buy steak and mushrooms once in a while. That's been a long, long time ago. But anyway, thank you for there and the now absent Jackson, and we'll be dealing with this next week. With that, we'll be prepping up for the presumed Kent Hovind discussion. And then I got stuff going on with our local groups. I'm picking up a speaker for our local secular group on the following Sunday after that. I'm the guy that's volunteered to get him from the airport and back and forth. So that's another little task to deal with. But anyway, thank you for all hanging in here. Spread the word on the project. I'll hang in as long as I can because I love the work and I think it's important to do, damn it. So I'm not going to stop so long as I can keep at it. Okay, bye.